The house always felt different when he was away. It wasn't about missing him, at least not in the way most would imagine. It was more about the way silence stretched across every room, like a sheet drawn too tightly over a bed. He had left for a 2-week business trip, calling it a necessary break. For clarity, as he phrased it. I never argued with those kinds of words. You don't argue with someone who believes they're doing the right thing. The same morning he left, I received his message. By the way, my son's moving in for a while. His internship is just a few blocks from us. Hope that's okay. There was no discussion, no request, just another decision made in a long line of silent compromises. I didn't respond immediately. I just stared at the screen for a while, wondering why it annoyed me more than it should. He arrived that afternoon, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder, white t-shirt sticking slightly to his chest from the heat, a half smile like he already knew he didn't need permission to be here. There was something about his energy, loose, calm, unaffected. He greeted me with a hug, and it lasted a second too long for something so casual. Or maybe I imagined that. But when we pulled apart, his eyes dropped quickly to my bare legs. I was wearing a silk robe tied loosely at the waist. I didn't change. I didn't move. I found myself putting on mascara before making tea that evening. Brushed my hair again, even though I'd already done it that morning. Slipped into a clean tank top, the thin one that always made me feel a little more aware of my own body. I didn't know what I was preparing for, but I kept preparing. He was polite, helpful in the kitchen, offered to carry laundry. He moved like someone used to being looked at, but not necessarily someone who noticed being watched in return. And yet, when I passed behind him, there was a certain awareness. His shoulders tensed just slightly. His eyes followed me in reflections when he thought I wouldn't notice. That night, I couldn't sleep. The sheets felt too warm. I turned over more times than necessary. And then I heard it. The shower running. Not a quick rinse. Long, steady. The sound of water hitting tiles in rhythm. I didn't mean to walk toward the bathroom. I told myself I was just getting water from the kitchen. But I paused near the door, barefoot on the cool floorboards, listening. I don't know what I was listening for. The water? His breath? My own shame? The door was closed, a thin line of light slipping beneath it. I stood there longer than I should have. Not touching the handle, not moving, just staying. My pulse had a slow, heavy throb in my neck. My fingers were trembling slightly, like they were responding to something unspoken. I returned to my bedroom, but I didn't sleep. I lay awake for hours, my eyes open in the dark, listening not to the silence, but to the way my body hummed under it. And when morning came, I didn't feel rested. I felt alert. Changed, maybe. But not in the romantic, cliché way people describe. No butterflies, just heat. Hunger. The awareness that something had shifted inside me and the quiet realization that I didn't want to shift it back. The next morning unfolded with the same habitual precision. Coffee brewed in the French press, blinds tilted halfway open, soft music playing from my phone in the background. But nothing felt automatic anymore. My robe clung differently. My skin registered the brush of fabric more acutely. Even my reflection in the kitchen window seemed altered, like I was trying to see myself through someone else's eyes. He was already in the kitchen when I walked in. His back to me, standing shirtless, slicing avocado with a lazy confidence that didn't look rehearsed. The muscles in his arms shifted slightly with every motion. His hair was damp, the ends curling at the base of his neck. The space smelled faintly of citrus soap and roasted coffee. I reached for a mug, and he turned, leaning casually against the counter. His eyes moved across me slowly, taking in the oversized men's button-up shirt I'd thrown on over barely there lace underwear. The shirt wasn't his father's, but it may as well have been. The symbolism was too pointed, too intimate. I ignored that. "You look like you're about to walk out on a bad date," he said, a crooked smile curling at the corner of his mouth. I didn't laugh. just raised an eyebrow and poured my coffee. But my heart responded before my face did. That simple comment reached somewhere inside me I'd been trying to mute for years. There was no grand orchestration to what followed. No dramatic pause, no swelling music. I turned to place the mug down, and he stepped forward at the same time. Our movements collided. Subtle, natural, and yet completely deliberate. His hand brushed mine as he reached for the sugar, and for a second too long, we didn't move. Then he kissed me. Not like someone asking a question, like someone answering one I hadn't dared to ask. Sometimes I found him sitting on the back steps, barefoot, with the cat curled beside him like he belonged here more than either of us. And I watched him. From windows, from doorways, from behind the steam of my mug, always pretending I wasn't looking. That morning, I lingered longer over my reflection than usual. The mirror in our bedroom didn't lie, but it didn't betray me either. I didn't wear anything daring, just a fitted cream-colored dress that ended at the knee, cinched at the waist with a soft belt. Modest, but the fabric clung lightly in places where I still liked to feel watched. I added a pale gloss to my lips. Not for him. Just for myself. I told my husband I'd rearrange the guest room while he was gone. Something about wanting more natural light, better airflow. He smiled and kissed my temple, already preoccupied with his phone. After he left, I walked up to the second floor with a notebook and a tape measure, but my head was somewhere else. I could feel it before it happened. The quiet behind me, the faint pressure of someone standing just out of frame. He appeared in the doorway, hair damp, carrying 2 mugs of tea. His shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, his sleeves pushed to the elbow. He looked like a man halfway between comfort and decision. "I figured you'd need caffeine if you're moving furniture," he said. I took the mug from him, fingers grazing his. Too long to be casual, too short to be deliberate. "Thanks," I murmured, not trusting the sound of my own voice. We spent the next hour moving the bed frame to the opposite wall. The mattress was heavier than I remembered, the headboard awkward against the corners of the room. We worked silently, trading glances only when absolutely necessary. But even in silence, something swelled between us. It wasn't tension. Tension had an edge, a warning. This was something rounder, fuller, like a held breath. At one point, as we shifted the dresser, a bracelet slid off my wrist and rolled beneath the bed. I bent to reach it, but couldn't see it. He knelt beside me, their shoulders brushing. His arm stretched under the frame, and as he handed it back to me, our eyes met. Too close. Too sudden. I didn't move. There was a hesitation, a split second where the moment could have passed without consequence. But it didn't. He didn't speak. Just looked at me with that calm, disarming focus I had forgotten men could have. And slowly, like testing a memory, he leaned in. The kiss wasn't urgent. It didn't crash or burn. It settled, soft, uncertain, suspended between daring and apology. His lips met mine with almost unbearable gentleness, as if asking a question he didn't have the words for. I didn't respond, but I didn't pull away. I stayed there, stunned by the quiet of it, by the stillness in my own body. Then I stood. My bracelet clutched in my fist. My heart thundered in my chest like something trying to escape. I walked out of the room without a word, without turning back. Not out of anger, but because if I stayed even 1 second longer, I knew I'd reach for him again. Downstairs, I washed my hands twice. The water was too hot. The soap smelled too sweet. Everything felt exaggerated, theatrical, like I was performing the role of someone composed. I sat at the dining table, staring at the untouched notebook, and tried to remember why I came upstairs to begin with. Nothing came. The rest of the day passed like sleepwalking. He didn't come down for lunch. I didn't call him. By the time my husband returned, I'd lit candles, played music, made pasta from scratch, an overcompensation that even I could barely stomach. He noticed the effort, complimented the sauce, kissed my cheek and asked about the guest room. I told him it was nearly done. that everything was fine. But later, lying beside him in bed, his arm draped heavily across my hip, I felt nothing but space. Not physical, emotional. Like I'd become a room he used to spend time in, now repurposed for storage. I closed my eyes, replaying the kiss. Not for guilt, but for clarity. Because it hadn't been about lust or betrayal or reckless impulse. It had been about recognition. The terrifying, irresistible pull of being seen, truly seen, after so long of feeling invisible. And I knew even then that it wouldn't be the last time. My husband suggested it like an afterthought over breakfast, somewhere between reading the news and buttering his toast. You know, he said, he could stay here a while longer, until he figures out his next move. It's a big transition. Might help to have family around. He didn't look up as he said it, didn't notice how my hand froze mid-reach toward the coffee pot. I nodded before I could stop myself, my voice barely audible above the clink of his spoon in the sugar bowl. Of course. That makes sense. It made perfect sense, objectively. And yet, that one decision rearranged everything inside me like plates shifting under the ocean. I could feel the tremor long before it would surface. From that day, the house began to hum with a frequency I couldn't ignore. The spaces between rooms felt shorter. The air grew heavier in hallways, in kitchens, in stairwells. It wasn't just that he was here. It was how present he was. How aware I became of doors opening, water running, the sound of bare feet on wooden floors. I began to anticipate his movements the way you anticipate a storm before you hear thunder. We developed a rhythm that never announced itself. In the mornings, I lingered in my robe longer than necessary. I chose fabrics that moved with me. Soft cottons, satin hems that brushed against skin like memory. I didn't name the impulse. I just allowed it. I'd enter the kitchen to find him already there, sipping coffee, reading on his tablet. He never said much. Sometimes just lifted his eyes as I walked in, holding my gaze a beat too long, and I'd feel something stir in my abdomen, low and warm and dangerous. I told myself it was harmless, that nothing had happened. Not really. One kiss, accidental, a moment suspended. But in truth, something had already taken root. Not in my body, in my attention. I was aware of him constantly, even when he wasn't in the room. One afternoon, we crossed paths in the upstairs hallway. I was carrying towels to the linen closet. He'd just come out of the shower, a white t-shirt clinging to damp skin, his hair curling slightly from the humidity. He stepped aside to let me pass, but neither of us moved immediately. I felt the heat of his body before I saw his expression. Open, careful, waiting. Not presumptuous, not aggressive. Just there. I said something about the weather. Useless words, tossed into the space like pebbles into a lake, watching the ripples spread. He nodded, eyes dropping briefly to the floor before returning to mine. We didn't touch, but the narrowness of the hallway meant I could smell his skin. Fresh soap, something herbal and clean. I walked past without brushing against him. It felt like swallowing a scream. That evening, I dressed slowly. I chose a long navy blue dress with a low back, not revealing, but undeniably feminine. I added a pair of earrings I hadn't worn in years. Silver, delicate, a gift from a time I used to feel desirable. When I joined my husband downstairs, he looked up and smiled. "You look nice," he said, kissing my forehead. "What's the occasion?" I told him I was just tired of loungewear. He laughed and went back to his email. I watched him type, his focus elsewhere. I wondered if he even remembered the last time he touched me without prompting. Later that night, long after he'd fallen asleep, I stood by the bedroom window, the curtain brushing my bare shoulder. The street outside was quiet. The porch light cast golden shapes on the lawn. I saw a figure move in the side yard. Subtle, almost a shadow. He was walking to the garage, or maybe just pacing. I didn't turn on the light. I stood there, watching him move, and I felt something throb in me. Not longing exactly, but a kind of sorrow. A realization that this had already passed the point of innocent. The next morning, I found his jacket draped over the kitchen chair. I reached for it without thinking, folding it carefully, holding it in my hands longer than necessary. My husband walked in just then, distracted by a call, and didn't notice the flush on my neck, the way I pressed the jacket to my chest before setting it down. At lunch, the three of us sat together at the table. My husband talked about an upcoming business trip. 2 days, maybe 3. He asked if I'd be all right alone in the house. I told him I would. I smiled. I didn't look at his son. I didn't need to. Because the moment the words left my husband's mouth, the temperature in the room shifted. A current passed under the table, subtle and unmistakable. The kind that precedes lightning. And when the plates were cleared and my husband went back to his office upstairs, I stayed in the kitchen. Alone. Except I wasn't alone. I felt his eyes on me through the glass of the sliding door where he stood barefoot in the yard, pretending to check his phone. Neither of us said a word, but every nerve in my body was already preparing for what I now knew was inevitable. He left that morning just after dawn. The zipper of his suitcase scraped softly against the floor as he rolled it down the hall, and I followed him with a practiced expression, the same I'd worn for years during early departures. Alert, supportive, a little wistful. He kissed me at the door with the casual tenderness of someone who doesn't feel watched, then turned and walked down the porch steps into the waiting cab without glancing back. When the engine disappeared down the street, I closed the door and leaned against it for a moment longer than necessary. The house exhaled around me. For the first time in days, silence felt honest. We walked together down the hall into the bathroom, the smallest room in the house. No windows, one narrow strip of overhead light. I crouched near the faucet, turning the knob. A weak sputter, then a sudden rush. The pipe gurgled before spraying a full stream of water, catching both of us by surprise. It splashed hard against the tiled wall, misting back across our shirts, soaking us instantly. I gasped. He laughed. The water soaked through my thin blouse, clinging to my skin. I looked down instinctively, saw how the fabric turned sheer, how the outline of my bra peeked through like a secret being revealed without permission. I turned to shut off the valve. My finger slipped once before I managed it. Then silence. He was standing inches behind me. Wet hair, soaked collar, breathing deeper now. I turned slowly. The air felt too still, like it held its breath with us. I expected hesitation. What I got was intention. He lifted the towel from the counter but didn't hand it to me. He unfolded it, stepped closer, and without a word, wrapped it around my shoulders. His hands, broad and steady, lingered as he adjusted the edges, pulling the fabric gently until it framed me. The gesture wasn't urgent. It was careful, almost reverent. I didn't look up. I didn't need to. I could feel the pull between us like static clinging to the air. My breath caught when he lifted his hand again. This time, not with fabric, but skin. His fingers brushed my neck, slowly tracing the damp curve where my hair stuck to my skin. Then, finally, he leaned in. He kissed the base of my neck, then lower, barely above my collarbone. His lips were soft, warm, and deliberate. Not demanding, not testing boundaries. Just there, claiming something I didn't know I'd offered. My hand rose without thinking, resting against his chest. I could feel his heart beating, faster than his breath. My eyes closed. The towel slipped slightly from my shoulders, but neither of us moved to fix it. It was different from the first kiss. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a moment we could step away from. It felt like an answer, one I had already accepted long before it was asked. We didn't speak. There was nothing to clarify, no justification, only the weight of what had already passed between us. Then I heard the sound I'd been dreading for days. The front door, the slam of it, casual but final. Keys landing in a bowl. The sound of footsteps. His footsteps, returning from the trip. From the job. from the version of reality I was supposed to keep breathing inside. My body went cold. I stepped back, pulled the towel tighter around me. Our eyes met for one suspended second before I turned and walked quickly out of the room. My heart pounded against my ribs as I passed the hallway mirror. My hair was wet, skin flushed, lips parted. I reached the bedroom and shut the door behind me. Inside, I sat on the edge of the bed, towel clutched against me like armor. I listened to the sounds outside the room. Greetings, the scraping of shoes on tile, the kitchen faucet running. Life picking up exactly where it had paused. But I wasn't in the same place anymore. And neither was he. The return of my husband didn't shift the center of the house as much as I thought it would. He moved through the rooms with the same soft authority he always had, setting his suitcase by the front door instead of carrying it upstairs, hugging me briefly at the waist with one arm, his lips brushing my temple like a checklist. The kind of gesture that had once made me feel safe. Now it made me feel observed, as though I were being appraised and quietly approved of, like the condition of the kitchen or the trimmed hedges in the yard. He talked more than usual that evening, telling short stories from the road, minor inconveniences, hotel noise, a missed dinner with colleagues. I nodded in the right places, smiled occasionally, refilled his glass when it was nearly empty. All the while, I could feel the weight of another set of eyes on me from the edge of the room. He barely spoke. He sat quietly at the far end of the couch, thumbing through his phone like he was trying to pretend he wasn't part of the atmosphere. But I could sense the tension in his posture. That slight stillness of someone holding something in, measuring every breath. I pretended not to notice. I had to. Later that night, my husband slid into bed beside me with the same predictability that had come to define our routine. His hand found my hip beneath the sheets, tentative but familiar. I didn't move away. I didn't speak. He kissed my shoulder. A soft, searching kind of kiss, as though trying to remember how intimacy used to begin. His fingers traced my spine lightly, like rediscovering a map he once memorized but now struggled to follow. I closed my eyes, allowed the motions, the weight of his body shifting against mine. But I didn't feel desire, only permission. The allowance of a role I was too tired to refuse. He moved slowly, carefully, as if trying to be gentle would fix what hadn't been broken loudly enough to notice. His touch was warm, practiced, polite. And I lay beneath it, perfectly still, perfectly silent, wondering when my own body had begun to feel like something separate from me. Afterward, he kissed my temple again, rolled away, and soon his breathing evened out. I stared at the ceiling in the dark. My skin still remembered another touch, the heat of a towel wrapped around me, a kiss not meant to be rehearsed. It was as if my own memory had split in two, one part replaying the scene in the bathroom, the other shrinking into the cold familiarity of the bed I'd shared for years. In the morning, I rose early. The light was just beginning to creep across the floorboards. I stood in front of the mirror in the bathroom, brushing my hair, examining the faint redness near my collarbone. Nothing obvious. Just enough to remind me that something had happened, that something still pulsed beneath the surface. At breakfast, the three of us sat in the kitchen. The sunlight painted long shadows across the table. My husband read emails on his tablet. He complimented the coffee absently. I said thank you. He didn't look up. The younger one watched me, quietly, without smiles or suggestion. Just watched, like someone trying to memorize a face before it changed again. Then, after a pause, he said, "You didn't sleep much." My hand froze around the coffee mug. My husband looked up, confused. "Hmm?" She was awake when I came downstairs. I heard movement around 5. I cleared my throat. Just couldn't fall back asleep. My husband nodded, unconcerned, and returned to his screen. But across the table, a different kind of silence stretched between me and him. Thick, quiet, and certain. I didn't correct him. I didn't look away. There was no need. We both knew sleep had nothing to do with it. Some days return without warning. Not because they replicate themselves, but because something in the air folds time in on itself. That morning, the weather turned unseasonably cool for late summer, and the wind carried the scent of something metallic, like rain on steel. I hadn't planned to go into the city, but when I looked at the calendar, realized I had a dentist appointment I'd forgotten to reschedule, it gave me a reason to leave. A real one I could say out loud. I dressed with more precision than usual, jeans that hugged in the right places, a light, fitted sweater that left just enough skin visible at the collarbones, low heels, red lipstick. Not because I expected anything. I just needed to feel like a woman walking on her own terms again, not someone navigating invisible boundaries inside her own kitchen. I didn't tell either of them I was going. Just grabbed my bag and keys and left quietly, the door clicking shut like punctuation. The city was loud in a way I hadn't missed. Horns, footsteps, conversations layered over each other. I moved through it like someone wearing an older version of herself. Polished. Contained. After the appointment, I walked with no destination, letting my body choose the direction. I stopped at a corner cafe I used to love years ago, one I hadn't been to since before we married. I chose a small table by the window, ordered something I didn't even really want, and watched strangers move through their own lives. Then I saw him. No warning. No reason. He appeared across the street like someone sent by impulse, dressed in a navy jacket and jeans, earbuds in. He looked completely unaware of the fact that he'd just shattered the quiet I'd tried to cultivate. He crossed the street. Our eyes met. He smirked. Not surprised. Just aware. I didn't move. I didn't wave. But 5 minutes later, he was sliding into the seat across from me. No invitation asked or given. His presence filled the space like a scent you never forget. He looked at me a long moment before speaking. I was on my way to a bookstore. Didn't expect to find you instead. I said nothing. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. I know why you left the house. You don't, I answered quietly. Don't I? I looked down at my cup, fingers tracing the rim slowly. He continued, voice lower now. He doesn't see you. You know that, right? My throat tightened. Not because it was cruel, but because it was true. He shifted his hand on the table, fingers tapping a rhythm near mine but never touching. That tension, always present, always waiting. I remembered the towel around my body, his breath on my neck, the quiet way he'd pulled back the second the door slammed. The knowledge that none of this had ended. Not even close. I finally spoke. This shouldn't have happened. But it did. I looked at him. Really looked. His face didn't hold guilt. Just a kind of defiant clarity. Like he'd already decided that if this was a fire, he'd burn willingly. We walked after that. Through side streets lined with trees that hadn't started turning yet. Our hands never touched, but our arms swung too close. Every step between us carried something unnamed. At the end of a narrow path near the park, he stopped. I'm not going anywhere, unless you tell me to. The words weren't a challenge. They were a promise. I didn't answer, because I didn't want him to go. And for the first time since it started, I wasn't afraid of what that meant. The change didn't announce itself. It crept in, quietly, like humidity before a storm, thickening the air, warping the familiar. Days moved forward, still wearing the costume of routine, but beneath them pulsed something less contained. He stayed, not just physically, but in the way his presence saturated the walls, the corners of my thoughts, the brief silences between conversations with my husband. There was no confrontation, no late-night discovery. Just the steady unraveling of the life I had managed for years with careful hands and tightened seams. The shift was internal, subtle, but unignorable. One afternoon, I sat alone in the bedroom, sunlight spilling in lazy rectangles across the bed. A soft breeze stirred the sheer curtain beside me, and the air smelled faintly of lavender from the oil I'd rubbed into my wrists earlier. On the floor beside me was a leather-bound notebook I hadn't touched in months. I opened it out of instinct more than intention. The pages still held the scent of ink and something familiar. Old paper, maybe, or just time. I found a page halfway through, covered in my own handwriting. I didn't remember writing it, not exactly, but the words felt like mine. Lines that weren't poetry, but weren't quite thoughts either. Half-formed fragments of something deeper. You wake up in someone else's rhythm and forget the sound of your own breath. He doesn't make me feel young. He makes me feel awake. This isn't love. It's something older, like memory, like instinct. I closed the notebook gently, as if it were a confession. That evening, he returned home later than usual. I was already in the kitchen, chopping herbs with practiced indifference. My husband was upstairs on a conference call that never seemed to end. The click of the front door, his footsteps across the floor, that long waited pause in the doorway before he said anything. "Smells good." "It's just soup," I replied, not turning. He stepped closer. I didn't flinch. His hand brushed my lower back lightly, as if to say, "I'm here," and I let it linger. That night, my husband suggested a weekend at the coast. Out of nowhere, over dinner, between spoonfuls of lentil stew. "Just the two of us," he said. "It's been too long since we got away." I blinked. The words felt like they were from another life, another version of him. One who noticed when I changed my hair or bought a new dress. I smiled, polite and almost convincing. "I don't think I can get away from work right now." He studied me for a second too long. Something flickered behind his eyes, something he didn't voice. But he nodded, dropped the subject. Later, I stood barefoot on the patio, holding a cup of cooling tea, looking out into the dark. The sky was clear, sharp with stars, and the air had that early autumn bite. I set the cup down and wrapped my arms around myself. Behind me, I heard the door slide open. He stepped out, quiet as always. "I read something once," he said, "about how people get addicted to being needed. Not loved, just needed." I didn't respond. He moved beside me, not touching, but close enough that I could feel the warmth of his body again. "You ever wonder what it would feel like to be wanted instead?" I turned to him, our eyes locked in the dim light. "I think I already know," I said. And that truth, raw, simple, irreversible, hung between us like smoke. Because I did. And no matter how much I tried to stay grounded in the life I had built, I could feel the edges of it crumbling. Quietly. Without permission. He left early. There was no goodbye. No suitcase rolled down the hallway. No echoing door click. Just a folded piece of paper on the kitchen table, propped against the ceramic salt shaker like a makeshift monument. The house was quiet when I came down that morning, more than usual. Even the refrigerator hummed at a lower frequency. I knew before I saw the note. I felt the emptiness of him. Gone not just from the room, but from the gravity of the place. I didn't rush to read it. I poured my coffee first, sat slowly at the table, let the steam curl upward in soft spirals. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, but light had begun stretching across the floorboards like long fingers trying to pull something hidden into view. The paper was heavy stock, not torn from a notebook, not scribbled on the back of a receipt. Chosen. Deliberate. His handwriting. Clean. Steady. "You'll remember how you lived. I'll remember how you looked at me. That's enough. Don't follow." That last line, it settled deep in my chest like a slow bruise. There was no drama in his departure, no confrontation, just a full stop. Not because it meant peace, because it meant he understood exactly what couldn't be said aloud. Upstairs, my husband was still asleep. I could hear the rhythm of his breath through the wall, even and unbothered. Last night, he had brought me breakfast in bed for the first time in years. Scrambled eggs, slightly too soft, toast cut diagonally. He'd said, "Let's start again. Just you and me." He had no idea that while he'd been flipping eggs, the man who had seen me actually seen me, was wrapping his jacket around a memory and quietly walking out of our lives. I sat with the note until the coffee went cold. I didn't cry. There was nothing left inside that hadn't already been wrung out across sleepless nights, hollow silences, and the edge of decisions no one wanted to make. Instead, I rose slowly. I opened the window above the sink. The morning air was crisp, the kind that tightens the skin and sharpens your lungs. The smell of early dew, of something ending or beginning. I spent the rest of the day in silence. I folded laundry, watered the garden, let music play faintly in the background. Everything around me moved as if nothing had happened. That was the strangest part. How the world had the nerve to keep spinning when mine had changed shape entirely. My husband left for errands late in the afternoon. As soon as I heard the car roll down the driveway, I walked into the spare room, the one we'd called a guest room for years, even though no guests ever came. I opened the closet. It was nearly empty, save for one navy sweatshirt forgotten on a hanger and a paperback left on the nightstand. I stood there, fingers resting against the spine of the book. He hadn't taken it all with him, but maybe he hadn't meant to. I returned to the bedroom, pulled the heavy blanket off the bed, stripped it down to the fitted sheet. The mattress was firm beneath my palm, the same place where I'd spent countless nights pretending to be content. I lay down, fully dressed, and stared at the ceiling. I thought of his hand on my thigh in the car, the rain in the parking lot, the first kiss on the edge of morning light, the way he had never apologized for wanting me, and how I had never asked him to. There was no tidy ending, no final decision made that day. Only this: I no longer belonged entirely to the life I had. And I didn't know yet who I was becoming. But I knew I wouldn't forget. Not the towel. Not the breath on my neck. Not the way his name had never needed to be spoken aloud to leave a mark on me. Some stories don't close. They just echo,